So I think we should just get into the Fenris myth.
Okay, so
Yeah,
yeah,
same.
let's just go into. We don't have much time, but so basically, what happens in Cuchulainn's death is what sets up this parallel to Norse mythology, which is we've talked about how Tyr puts his hand in the mouth of Fenrir the wolf, and Tyr is Mitra, paralleling Yudhishthira, and other Mitra parallels that Dumasil has laid out, and that I've also added a few clarifying points. But Tyr puts his hand in. So in the Snorri version of the Prose Edda, Fenrir is bound to a pillar. He's actually tied to a pillar first, not in the Prose Edda. That's not mentioned, at least in the other version. But in Snorri, he's tied to a pillar with the fetters. And Tyr puts his hand in Fenrir's mouth, of course. And at the moment when he realizes he's deceived, at the moment when he gets tied to the pillar, basically, or fettered in general, whatever version you're reading, at the moment he realizes he's been tied and he can't break free, he bites off the hand of Tyr, who is Mitra. Now, if we look at the Irish version, Mitra or Tyr is Lu, and in general he's Lu, son of Ethnu or Enya, and so Lu is a Mitraic name, but sometimes Lu, son of Ethliu, is also called Lugith. There are multiple times where he's called Lugith Laufada, which is that is the Laufada, meaning of the long arm, the long hand, is the title of Lu, son of Ethliu, who is Mitra, if that makes sense. So there are multiple times where Lugith and Lu are used interchangeably. So Lugith can be seen as a form of the name Lu in this context. So basically, Cuchulainn is fighting Lugith. He goes and ties himself to a pillar stone because he's dying. Then Lugith approaches him and kills him, or cuts his head off. He cuts the head of Cuchulainn off while he's tied to the stone. The sword of Cuchulainn at that moment drops and cuts off Lugith's hand, which is a very odd thing to happen. It's dramatic. It makes a nice story. If you want to think this is just a random thing that he got his revenge at the last moment, but why? How come right when he has his head cut off, basically he becomes neutralized and identified with this pillar stone, or becomes one with this pillar stone where he's going to stand until the end of time? Why right at that moment there's this double thing that happens, which is he gets ended by Lugith, and then Lugith in turn at that same moment loses his hand because he has done this. And Lugith is Mitraic, basically. So you have this god, or this figure, who is the Hound. That's his name. He's the Hound, who he's unstoppable. He doesn't know. Sometimes he doesn't know friend or foe. He becomes tied to this pillar, and at the moment that he's tied to this pillar, basically he cuts off the hand of Lugith, who is the parallel of Tyr. Okay, so I think that right there. I hope I'm getting that across. But
Yeah.
there's more that also parallels, because it seems like the Irish version has split this myth into two different moments in Cuchulainn's, which is the myth I already talked about, which is when he goes in the vats of cold water. There is 3 vats of cold water. Their purpose is to pacify him, neutralize his rage, so that he can be controlled, brought into society in that moment. But basically, the point is, they are, in order to pacify him, they have to try these 3 things in succession. Cuchulainn breaks the first 2. He breaks. So in the Norse myth, they try to bind Fenrir with two cords, one after another. He breaks both of the first two cords, and the third cord finally holds him and fetters him so that he can be controlled. And he's just kept peaceful, basically as within the domain of the Aesir until he breaks free at Doomsday, is the idea. But so there is this story of they're trying to bind him and pacify him with a succession of three things. In the Norse, it is fetters. In the Gaelic version, it is 3 vats of cold water that are meant to pacify him. And he breaks the first two in both stories, and the final one finally pacifies him, neutralizes his threat, and he's able to be brought into society. And I think this is also connected to why Fenrir is kept as a pet of the Aesir. He's not he could be just killed or excluded from the Aesir, but he's, unlike the other children of Loki, he is brought into the community of the Aesir, but he has to be pacified there. That is what's happening. Is he's not just I mean, you could take it as he's just unkillable or something, but he's not unkillable, really, in the end. So what they're doing is they're bringing this being, this wolf, into the Aesir society, but he has to be pacified. And so I think it's the same thing that you see in the Cuchulainn vats of cold water myth. And so that, combined with the pillar myth, those are two halves of the one story of how this god is pacified with this triple attempt to pacify and neutralize, and then finally he's bound to this pillar, as in the Snorri version, and then cuts off the hand of the Mithraic god in that moment. And he is the Hound. I have to reiterate again, he's literally a terrifying hound, whereas Fenrir is the terrifying wolf. And the imagery of when he does his warp spasm, when he kills, they're terrified of Cuchulainn when he's coming back to town, that he's going to kill friend as well as foe and destroy everything. So that is the threat. And there's even a prophecy that Skahach gives of Cuchulainn, which describes all the terror and the rampage that he will be involved in, and it talks about doomsday. It's kind of vague, but it's but I could also read that if we had time. I'm not sure if that would be interesting.
Well,
what did you have to say, though, Collin?
Yeah. I'm also, I want to add the Yupa theme is still in the Fenris myth as well, and like you said, Fenris is kept as a pet, but it's more like he's a kid, a boy trying to prove his strength. That's he literally goes through the thoughts in his head through in the Prosetta version, which is like last time I broke the other fetter, but I've gained strength since then. So maybe if I do this, this will increase my fame. So he's like a fame hungry young member of the Manor Bund, and then of course this goes back to Odin's association with wolves. He has 2 wolves already. But yeah, the Yupa theme is very strong in there because they go through how they set it up in the Fenris myth, which is they place the slab, which is called Knoll, which is also a river, it means scream, and then they have a stake inside the slab to keep it there, which is called I forget. But yeah, the main point is they have like a stake and a slab to hold Fenris in place with the Gleipnir, the last fetter.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, and obviously we know that the wolf is a symbol of the Manor Bund. So there is this terrifying wolf in Norse mythology, but and wolf is a symbol of the Manor Bund and Odin and etc. And so why shouldn't this wolf be connected to that as a theme? It seems obvious. He is the terrifying potential of the Manor Bund, of warrior energy growing beyond its boundaries and threatening to destroy friend as well as foe, which there's always this terrifying potential within the mana blend. Absolutely. And in the Vedic or in the Indian Hindu version, Narasimha is treated that same way, and he's identified with like space and time or something as these consuming things that will destroy in the Armageddon. And so what I wanted to also talk about is the fact that Narasimha is in a myth identical in the Shivite or Shavite version of the Narasimha myth. It's much more like the Norse version with Fenrir, and Narasimha is in the position where Fenrir is. In the Vaishnavite version, there is this Hiranyakashipu, a different demon who kind of seems to have merged in there and taken the place where, and Vishnu becomes the victorious god who who kills the demon, right? But in the Shavite version, what happens is Narasimha is on a rampage, and they're afraid he's going to destroy the world. Narasimha is Vishnu, and so Shiva spawns a avatar. He spawns an avatar of himself, specifically whose specific purpose is to kill or neutralize Narasimha. And before they can kill Narasimha, he defeats Shiva. He basically, I can't remember if it says he kills Shiva or pacifies Shiva or something like that. But and then after he pacifies Shiva, Shiva's avatar Sharabha kills or pacifies Narasimha in response. So it's the exact narrative structure of the Norse outcome, which is Odin, who is Shiva, has a son whose specific goal is to avenge him and kill Fenrir, who has killed Odin. So that's why this is why I think there's this core of the Narasimha myth that is original, but some of the Namuchi stuff and Indra stuff some motifs have been moved around a little bit in some of the versions. But if you look at, this is in multiple Puranas of the Shavite tradition, so it's not just one variant either. This is like what the Shavite tradition says. If you look at the Skanda Purana and the Shiva Purana and the Skanda Purana and I think the Sharabha Upanishad or something like that.
And the Skanda Purana is one of the oldest and the longest of the Puranas, I believe.
Yeah, it's the longest, and it could have been the Linga Purana instead of the Skanda. It's one of those two. Anyways, so it is a consistent thing in the Shavite tradition that Narasimha is raging. He is going to destroy the world. He kills or pacifies, defeats Shiva, but Shiva spawns an avatar whose specific goal is to kill and stop Narasimha from destroying the world. And that's what happens. He pacifies Narasimha. Sharabha does. So I think the fact that aligns so perfectly is really convincing to me. It's really convincing to me that Narasimha really is in the position of Fenrir and really is Vishnu. Once you see for me, if you align like three things across the board, if you align the Irish tradition, you see this version of Vishnu who is this. They're terrified of him, that he's going to destroy friend and foe, and he has all these specific myths that then align with Fenrir, and then Fenrir aligns perfectly with this one tradition, the Shavite tradition of the Narasimha myths. Whereas if you look at only the Vaishnavite versions, it doesn't align anymore. It's like they didn't want Narasimha to be the great villain, although in some sense I think the Vaishnavite version does treat him as this Armageddon deity as well, but they might put a positive spin on it more, is what I'm saying. I think they treat him as he's going to purify sin and destroy bad things and not good or something. So anyway, I think
Uh,
there's some airbrushing is the word I use. There's some
yeah, yeah.
airbrushing there, which to me, I mean, it's just the evidence. If you look at the comparative evidence, that's what it's telling me. I don't know what you guys see
Well,
from
I
that.
mean, obviously I'm in agreement, but another thing about Narasimha being this terrifying figure that could destroy everything, he also shares a name with Shiva, which is Mahakala, which is great time. So
Yeah, exactly.
the ultimate destroyer is time. So at the end of the day, it's time's gonna win. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
and so that's and what I read was that because Vishnu is the god of space, expanding space, that he is identified with time as well because of that. It's like the foundation space time, basically, that is
That
it's
kind
going
of
to
leads back
overcome.
to the value thing, like
And that
value as
that
the
was the value.
expansion in time.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
going back to this, I think we have one possible Vishnu parallel, although it has nearly no importance compared to the Vishnu or Cuchulainn or the other parallels. But we do have Teucer in the Trojan War. He is basically very short compared to his brother Ajax. So Ajax, as we know, is Vayu already. So it's also interesting that you'd find these brothers, Vayu and Vishnu, kind of incarnated in this Trojan War. And then an interesting thing is that Teucer, well, other than being an archer, like obviously Krishna, he basically after the war is cursed to not stay in his own homeland due to essentially having let his brother die. And this is interesting because Krishna in the Mahabharata also gets a curse. He is cursed for having brought about the deaths of all these people in the war, and especially his cousin's cousin, so of Duryodhana and the others. And there he actually accepts gladly this curse, and this is true for both Teucer and Krishna. Like they both are like, oh well, I will just do as it has to be. Like there's no worries about that, which is an interesting parallel here.
Also
Mm-hmm.
on your value thing, what exists in space? Air. So
Mm-hmm.
I mean it's pretty they're gonna come together. Just like
Yeah,
Vayu has the relationship with Indra because Indra is very associated with the wind and the air 'cause of thunder and rain. Same with Agni. Sure, there's an association with Agni there.
Well, yeah, this
mm-hmm.
also circles back to Letus and his interpretation of the myth of Hephaestus and Ares. He argues that Ares is the fire in the atmosphere, so obviously meaning thunder, essentially. So it all kind of circles back.
All right.
Although maybe Indra is more specifically associated with the thunder, whereas Vayu is more explicitly associated with the wind, so not necessarily fiery. And then Vishnu is more fiery, quote unquote, fiery than airy. So he's essentially the god of the Tejas and this kind of extreme heat or radiance. So it's kind of like they're like Vishnu and Vayu are two complementary halves, the wind side or atmosphere side and the fire or incandescence side to the nature of the Vajra wielded by Indra.
Well,
It's so
also, I think
interesting because Vayu. It's interesting because Vayu gets conflated with Indra. He has this connection with Vishnu that we're talking about, and he also gets identified with Rudra. He's sort of this like component that, like the wind, the air. It's combining here and there. I mean, I guess Agni has a similar quality of being in all the gods.
To be honest, Agni
Yeah.
has like three forms. One is the earthly fire, the atmospheric fire, and the celestial fire, which is usually identified with the sun. And this kind of also has its parallels in Rome, especially with Vulcan being the atmospheric fire, Vesta is the earthly fire, and then obviously we have the sun god. Janus is sometimes identified with the sun and the celestial fire. which is interesting because we have the sun as the first deity invoked in tantric rituals, just as we have Janus as the first deity invoked in Rome. So we have some material that could be interesting in this regard.
Yeah, I definitely think, yeah, the Janus stuff needs to be looked at more, since he has such strong Vayu and also Agni.
Well, and the thing is, he's also definitely a Prajapati kind of figure. He's called the good creator. He has four faces like Brahma, so it all kind of checks out with him being essentially Prajapati, and then having extensions that will lead him into the role of Agni and Vayu and other stuff, which are the deities normally identified more closely with Prajapati than any other.
I think we should
my only
into...
thing with my only thing with Janus is or with the good creator is that the Dagda is called creator as well, and so is Vayu, and he's the good god who is the creator. So I know Dagda is connected to Prajapati, and Prajapati is Vayu, so there's this overlap that's kind of hard to pick apart.
Yeah, I guess that even if the good creator is hypothetically a Vayu trait originally and not a Prajapati trait originally, we would still have Janus depicted as the first god and the god of first things. So, and he's even called like the god of the gods, which is possibly like not even Jove gets named like that. So, and also possibly the two heads could relate to the protogonos symbolism. He's called twi-natured and twi-horned, so it could have something to do with the two heads as well. Although the two heads are also an Agni staple, so it's maybe not that deep. Or maybe
two forms. The two forms are also Vayu in the two Vayus, the twin Vayus.
Yeah, of course, the good Vayu and the bad Vayu.
Iran, in the Avesta. And also here's the thing. I think all this recent stuff, including the Cuchulainn stuff, it's pointing towards the vital heirs as the precedent that gives. There's this state of vital heirs that are chaotic vital heirs, and they become kindled with, that's Indra, kindles into the Purusha, which is then Vishnu is the space that is sort of the womb that then gives birth to and becomes the Purusha. So that's the sequence I'm understanding from the Shatapatha Brahmana. And so there's the vital heirs is the chaotic beginning state, and heir is identified with Vayu. So my question is Janus the god of gods because the vital heirs actually do precede the state of unfolding, and they are Vayu and Jane, and that is where Janus or even the Dagda and Vayu are all the vital heirs in essence.
Well, Janus definitely does have an heir connection, so it definitely does work.
So that would be preceding Prajapati, although becoming then the vital heirs feed.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Prajapati.
We do have Ovid say that that Janus essentially existed originally as chaos. I'm not sure whether this chaos is to be taken in the Hesiotic sense necessarily. He might as well be taken otherwise, but essentially he then splits up into the various elements, and air has a kind of more important place among these elements. But also, other than these elements, we do have essentially the remainder taking the shape of the god Janus as we know him, keeping the multiple heads as a sort of sign of his original chaotic and undifferentiated nature. At least this is the explanation that Ovid tries to come up with. And so ultimately Janus does line up very well with the whole vital heir kind of things.
So he's the vital heirs. Then he's also named as the name of the Prajapati that he becomes maybe as well. So maybe in that tradition he is both the vital heirs and the Prajapati. Yeah. So that makes sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, since Prajapati is identified with Vayu as well as Agni. But anyway.
Indeed.
So I'll make a video to get like all the details, but also Vishnu has the Sudarshana chakra, which is a disc, which is a wheel of time or something. And
Also
Cuchulainn
his main
rides
weapon.
on. Cuchulainn rides. Yeah, it's his main weapon, his discus weapon that he throws. He rides on a wheel that carries him across a field, kind of like the lion was a symbol that I talked about on these obstacles he has to pass. Another one is a wheel that he has to run up on. So he's identified with a lion and a wheel back to back in that scene. And then Vishnu at the churning of the ocean, I think it's at the churning of the ocean. I could be wrong, but he cuts a mountain with his weapon, which I think it might be the discus. In that scene. But anyways, in one of the final battles of Cuchulainn, he also cuts a mountain, which is also his friend Fergus also cuts mountains, but Fergus is an Indru Vayu, and I think there's a Vayu myth where they cut mountains. But I think when you add it all together, the fact that Collin also cuts a mountain, that's probably
either Hanuman cutting a mountain, and Hanuman is probably a Vayu incarnation. So
exactly.
And we have Indra moving mountains in Teachings of the Odd-Eyed One.
Exactly.
I think there's maybe two instances with Vishnu cutting up mountains, though. One is the churning of the ocean, and another one is probably some sort of Vaishnava legend, in which essentially Vishnu, the Krishna, in the incarnation of Krishna, uses a mountain as a sort of umbrella to shield the cows and the cow herders from, the rain sent by Indra.
I think that's connected to the humbling of Indra and the sort of to me that has a parallel in Fergus in the Irish one. Fergus is he's fighting Conchobar, who is like a Brahman Prajapati, and he has his sword blow redirected to cut off the tops of 3 mountains instead. So this is clearly to me that parallel of the humbling of, or and in that fight he's trying to hammer Conchobar's shield and he can't make it move, and it's a shield that symbolizes the 4 quarters of the cosmos. So it's this really humbling of Indra, humbling of Thor myth, and in that myth he cuts the mountains as well. But then there's also this event where Cuchulainn also cuts a mountain, and so I think you have to differentiate and realize the Cuchulainn one is Vishnu cutting mountains, and that adds to the list.
Yeah, well, before it becomes irrelevant, when you mentioned Sudarshana Chakra, I have a bunch of notes from what I've been putting down since I've been hearing you guys. When you were talking about Cuchulainn's beast form earlier and the whole one-eyedness with Vishnu, I'm not sure if this was discussed at all anywhere, but a while ago, Vishnu, the way he got his Sudarshana Chakra was sacrificing his eye to Shiva. Because he had to do penance, and there were 1,000 lotuses that he was going to dedicate to each of Shiva's names. And Shiva tests his commitment by removing one of the lotuses, and Vishnu, when he realizes that the last lotus is missing, remembers that his name is lotus-eyed and plucks his eye out. And then Shiva is very impressed and pleased with his penance and rewards him with the Sudarshana Chakra.
Also, this matches exactly with a saint in, I think, Kashmiri Shaivism, who literally does the same thing. He notices that the eyes of the linga, one of them is damaged or is bleeding or something like that. So to stop it from happening, he takes out
bleeding.
He takes out his own eye and puts it on the linga. And before he can put his last eye there, Shiva stops him. So, this is a recurring thing. And then Shiva also has the third eye, and you can look into Netra Tantra for that if you want to learn more about that. But I'm not going to go into it here. But I also think...
so right there you see the Vishnu overlapping and being like a Rudra type overlap there. It's amazing, yeah.
I wonder too if Krishna using the Sudarshana Chakra to decapitate Shishupala has anything to do with Cuchulainn and Curoi or Gawain and the Green Knight, which is something I've mentioned to him. But to get back to Cuchulain's beast form, when you said that you could see his lungs and his liver in his mouth, that sounds exactly like how Vidarr stabs Fenrir's heart through his mouth to kill him.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I always kind of thought that detail was awkward. I was like, they're saying this so nonchalantly, like it's common knowledge, but no, you can't stab someone's heart through their mouth.
Yeah, exactly.
No, the wide open, the wide mouth is what connected at first in I was like, his mouth seems really wide. That's like Fenrir. That was actually one of the first things I was like, wait a minute, these things are aligned. But I didn't realize the heart thing. What were you gonna say, Collin?
Oh, well, I was gonna say, that's the recurring thing. And even in Anglo art, you can still see that hell is represented by a huge wolf's mouth. Like it's carried on even into Christianity, the wide mouthedness of the main demon. But another interesting thing is Namuchi's myth in the Rig Veda. His blood taints the Soma, right? Well, the gods in the Norse saga are very scared. That's why they don't kill Fenrir, by the way, is because they don't want his blood to taint their holy place.
Yeah.
So, like, it's exactly. So close.
So you see that, so you see this this overlapping there with the Namuchi myth, which is still kind of a mystery how it fits, because it's almost like it's part of this thing where they were making the Vishnu archetype or the Vishnu god not the ultimate danger or something. I don't know. You know, were they airbrushing and putting a different demon in place, or were some motifs being shared?
I'm starting to think it was probably just a later evolution of, or an earlier earlier iteration of that myth that got changed around a bunch in the other branches, but it somehow stayed consistent between Germanic and Celtic for the most part, except for the demonization of Fenris, which is a whole other thing that's gonna really shatter.
To me, definitely demonized and put in he's considered, he's presented, he's portrayed as part of the family of Loki, and so that's interesting. But before we touch on that, I wanted to read the Aurobindo quote, that this will kind of contextualize, like, why is the wolf a symbol of Vishnu, and why should this hound of this Cuchulainn, the hound, who has one eye in his berserker rage, why should he be Vishnu? So Aurobindo was a close reader of the Vedas, and he was really trying to read them for themselves rather than in the context of later Hindu developments, and reading, understanding the nature of the gods very esoterically. And so this is about who Vishnu is in the Rig Veda specifically. And this is his commentary on the hymn that we read earlier about Vishnu as a prowling animal in the mountains. It says, quote, "The deity of this hymn is Vishnu, the all-pervading, who in the Rig Veda has a close but covert connection and an almost identity with the other deity exalted in the later religion, Rudra. Rudra is a fierce and violent godhead with a beneficent aspect, which approaches the supreme blissful reality of Vishnu. Vishnu's constant friendliness to man and his helping gods is shadowed by an aspect of formidable violence, quote, like a terrible lion ranging in evil and difficult places, unquote, which is spoken of in terms more ordinarily appropriate to Rudra. Rudra is the father of the vehemently battling Maruts. And the Maruts are a division of the Rudras, because the Rudras are the sons of Rudra, like the Maruts are. Different names of the war bands that are sons of Rudra. Vishnu is hymned in the last sukta of the 5th mandala under the name of Evaya Marut, as the source from which they sprang, the source from which the Maruts sprang, that which they become, and himself identical with the unity and totality of their embattled forces. This is Vishnu. Vishnu is that which the Maruts become, and himself identical with the unity and totality of their embattled forces. Rudra is the deva or deity ascending in the cosmos, Vishnu, the same deva or deity, helping and evoking the powers of the ascent, unquote. And so this shows that in the Rig Veda, Vishnu is seen as the epitome of the Maruts, the warband, and described in terms that become more appropriate to Rudra. Actually, he's kind of merging symbolically with Rudra, and so that this is why he has this animal form, and this is why we see Cuchulainn and then again Fenrir as wolf forms who have this connection to the Vishnu mythos.
And then we can get into this maybe another time, but there's also some striking similarities between Vishnu and Loki, and its more negative side.
Yeah.
And also, I want to add.
Debate. We were gonna have a duel on this topic. You're gonna have to convince me of that. I'm not sure if
Loki is, in my opinion, for sure Kali Purusha.
So, yeah, we were discussing this last night, Collin and I. But there's some interesting. No. It's definitely an interesting topic. So we'll have to get into it another time.
Does he know about the parentage and the wife and the children? How they're all exactly the same?
Okay, maybe. Well, here's the thing. I'm not against the idea that he could be both, because the thing about Loki is, he's basically the Kali figure in Norse mythology, but he also births Fenris and also shares much of the same aspects as Vishnu, because Vishnu is known for his transgenderism. Vishnu can literally turns into a woman, seduces men, demons usually, and kills them. Loki is known for this in a much more negative light, and he is very trickstery. And in the Mahabharata, in the Krishna's representation, Krishna isn't like a main warrior. He's teaching like Arjuna. He's teaching everybody. He's the guru. So and he depends a lot on trickery more than anything else, and that kind of thing. That's my main thing there. I'm not against the idea that he could be both. Like, obviously, the Norse demonized the Vishnu figure. If he is to be Fenris or Loki, he's heavily demonized. So it could be that ultimately he is also Kali.
I think
these would actually open up a bit of questions. For instance, Athena is known to be a male-female. She's defined as such in the Orphic hymns. So does that in any way relate to Loki? Because they're pretty much the opposite kind of character. Although they are both tricksters in one way or another, but like also, is this a homology, or is simply the fact that they're both shifting sexes, which is not exclusive actually?
No,
like,
I'm not
just
saying
sticking to Greek and Roman mythology, like you have everything from
hold on
Zeus to Hermes, Aphrodite, all shifting sex every now and then.
But before you continue, Loki specifically, what makes him a pervert, literally a pervert in Lokasana, is he has sex as a woman, and he basically has a child as a woman. That was the line that he crossed. And Mohini does the exact same thing with Arjuna's son, that before he kills himself. So it's kind of eerie how much that specific aspect can line up. But then again, Mohini also didn't birth a bunch of demons. So
also it may be worth noting that the whole Loki turning into a mare thing actually does have plenty of parallels in except that in all parallels we have a female deity turning into a mare, as you would expect. So see Saranyu in the Vedic case, see the myth of the meter in Greece, but there's also a myth of Juno in which she doesn't turn into a mare, but she does create like a fake image of herself, and this image has sex with Ixion, who thinks that he's having sex with the real deity, the real goddess, and gives birth to Centaurs, which are half horse and half man being. So we still have this kind of horse motive going around. And actually, it's like we have a completion, quote unquote, of the Vedic myth, thanks to the two Greek myths, because here Hera creates her own double, which is what Saranyu does in the Vedic myths. She creates her own shade, her own shadow, and animates it and puts it in her place to satisfy her husband while she turns into a mare. Before her husband, turns into a stallion and does what they're supposed to do as husband and wife. So it's interesting. And
I also have a very, I personally think, a very strong mythological component to this too, because Vishnu in I think one of the renditions of the Namuchi myth, not the Narasimha one of the later Vedic ones, because it's mentioned multiple times. He has a role, and so does Mohini specifically, has a role in securing the Soma and bringing it back to the gods and restoring their immortality. And in the myth of Loki and Thiassi, we have Loki ending up losing the Amrita, the Soma, and he is the one who helps get it back ultimately, and is part of killing of Thiassi, which would be, I don't know if it really does correlate directly to the Namuchi myth, but it definitely is of the same vein of inspiration.
I mean,
it's strange.
Don't we have like the Soma
Loki
cycle
has
with
parallels? Loki has parallels with a bunch of random things too, though. It feels like to me, because the parallels to the demon Kali are so strong with Loki, which I haven't told you the ones that I was going to tell you about. But that it seems like he has this core that was Kali, and he has these random, maybe even borrowings of myths, of motifs that they thought were demonic, and maybe, for all I know, they could have demonized certain aspects and attached them to Loki that were like Vishnu tales originally, or because like you even have there's the nurse who pacifies Demeter by showing her genitals. Is that am I saying that? Am I telling that story right, Joseph?
Yeah, Balbo. Yeah, she shows her. She's allegedly like a woman with eyes on her nipples and a mouth for vagina, and so she shows that to Demeter and gets her to laugh. Like
she's a nice nurse figure, and then Loki is the one who takes that parallel myth in the Norse story. So that that doesn't make him Balbo. But it makes he has these random, he does these random things like you were saying. But I think the parallel to the parallel of the killing of Balder, as Dumasil goes into, I think to me this is one of his
hold on
parallels.
before you go into this, before you like totally destroy my theory.
Well, I don't have to do it. We could make it a different discussion. I probably have to go soon, anyways. But
I just want to bring this up as just a question. Is Kali ever a benefactor of the gods? Is he ever considered a deva? Because he's birthed by Brahma, right? But Brahma also totally screws with everybody. Like he's not on any side per se. So exactly. Loki is literally called an Aesir, like he's a god in at least half of the mythology we have, and then he is bound just like Fenris is, but by his own son's entrails. So
I mean, the binding is never exclusive. Like you have Prometheus bound.
I know.
Hera bound. You have plenty of these that are bound every now and then. Saturn is bound. So it's always, it's kind of figuring out which is a motif that just happens to shift around and to be used for different deities, and what happens to be a character homology, which kind of can explain, if not everything about a character, at least the essence of that character, right?
Well, Fenris is definitely, in my opinion, the Chulainn. I'm just saying that Loki has a lot of similarities, even if he is Kali ultimately. But
so maybe some Vishnu things were being demonized and attached in that way. I think it's also, but I think it's more possible. Or I don't know the answer to this, because maybe some motifs that were like a Vishnu type were indeed being attached to Loki. I can't really say. what happened there, because some of those things are kind of general. Some of the similarities you're pointing to seem to me general, but I think it's very possible we're just getting a snapshot of Fenrir. Maybe he was being demonized. It's like we have these few mentions of him, but there's this whole vast Vishnu mythos that could have been attached to the Fenrir.
Well,
and
it feels
we're
like
just getting a snapshot of it, and because I don't see why we should assume that like the father, he would have been split up. That's a strange, like
yeah. Well,
but like some motifs there could have been bleeding over. Obviously he's considered in the family of Loki, so they were at least in that tradition that we have recorded. We don't know what the Proto-Germanics, how they treated. But
well,
I think to me there's these really specific things with Fenrir. The moment that Cuchulainn is bound, he cuts off the hand. It's this give and take moment that happens like simultaneously, as well as the cooling, the pacifying. Like these are like specific things, and the wolf form that gets stabbed through his
well,
mouth.
there seems to be a lot more missing context, because probably due to
Missing
Snorri's
context.
summary of these myths, and not like a literal foretelling of all of Germanic history. So there seems like there's a bunch of lost context with Fenris, and we only get the most important parts, I would say.
Exactly, and so that makes him look, maybe that makes him appear more demonized than like the people have before that writing down, before that period or something. It was getting narrow. Maybe it was getting narrowed down because he's the embodiment of the wolf, which is the warband, but it goes out of control. And so if he's the embodiment of the warband, that's not hated in itself. It's ambivalent, and so there was probably this vaster context, but also he becomes the Armageddon force.
Also,
force, sorry.
Another thing we might want to think about is one of Loki's brothers, who's mentioned like barely. His lineage is mentioned like once, I think. But one of his brothers is named Helblindi, and Helblindi is also a name for Odin. So he has ultimately, so it's like 3 kids all
That's
spawned from Farbauti. So that begs the question: is Farbauti just another name for Utgarda Loki, or Buri, or would it be Buri?
I mean, to be honest, if I wanted to play the devil's advocate, I would say that it is simply consistent with Odin being Loki's blood brother.
Yep.
Which is not necessarily biological brother, but they have
well,
this
ultimately
sort
they
of
all come from
making brotherhood.
Well, ultimately,
yeah.
in
I mean,
Germanic lineage, you're all coming from that guy who came out of the ice. So it's all going to go back to that.
Yeah. I think, when you look at Fenrir, it does give evidence that maybe the Norse tradition was considered Vishnu, the god, or whoever. Maybe they were demonizing him as a whole, but it's hard to know that for sure. I think we can't really know the context. Maybe they were not. Maybe there was a much more complex view of the Vishnu type. And so,
yeah, I mean, also considering that the two Narasimha narratives, the Shiva and the Vaishnava, are basically opposite. So it kind of makes sense for it not to be so easy.
Also, maybe we should
line between Vaishnavism and Shaivism. It's like they completely disagree with each other about who the demon was in this story, and they say the other side is wrong. And this is if the Vishnu is getting demonized as the destroyer here, then it appears like that's a Shaivite slant. If instead Vishnu's the savior, then it appears the other way, possibly, or more neutral. But
good old sectarianism.
So it's just hard to sectarianism. So it's hard to know. And the other thing that there are so many wrenches, there's so many angles and complications to this. But Vidarr, the slayer of Fenrir, is who Dumasil theorized was Vishnu.
I was just gonna say this. We should probably explain why Vidarr isn't Vishnu.
Yeah, well, he isn't to me because the parallel to Sharaba is so exact, that Sharaba is spawned from Shiva to
not only Sharaba,
to pacify Narasimha. sorry.
Yeah,
Is
not
it
only
Virabhadra?
yeah, not like there's multiple
Virabhadra?
kids.
Multiple.
Well, even
I didn't
Bhairava.
see one. I only saw one in the versions I read. I only saw Sharaba being.
I mean, maybe Sharaba is the one who sprouts specifically for the Narasimha question,
Yeah.
and then each other child is born in a different occasion, like Virabhadra for the issue with Sita and the Daksha sacrifice. So obviously,
well, also
it's kind of a quality of this deity, you know, of Shiva, to beget different versions of himself, and well, that's kind of his thing.
Well,
you know,
it happens multiple times in Norse, and then even with the Bhairava myth, which is, I mean, probably a good chunk later than anything in the Vedas, but still nonetheless important. Bhairava is basically created for the sole purpose of cutting off, making Brahma's ego a little smaller. So like it's almost the same type of motif, just done with a more positive god.
Yeah, it is definitely the same type of motif. Yeah, it's just it's so interesting because there's this fault line, and Dumasil literally was saying Vidarr is actually Vishnu because the first two letters of his name Vi is one sign to Dumasil, because there's a repeated play on Vi in Vishnu hymns and stuff, so different Vi words, even though Vidarr and Vishnu do not come from the same root etymologically. But he's saying there's this connection because there's this play on Vi constantly. But then also Loki says to Vidarr when he comes to Aegir's feast, he says, "Make space for," or he says something like "Make space for Vidarr" when Vidarr is going to talk. So this is, to him, this is another pun on Vidarr being the god of space, of making space, which is Vishnu. And then finally, when he spreads open Fenrir's mouth, that's making with his foot. He uses his shoe, and the foot is associated with Vishnu because Vishnu is the three steps. The three steps are the great Vishnu myth, and also Vishnu is called the feet of the Purusha, actually, because so that's another. Vishnu has this connection to the foot, actually, and Vidarr has the powerful foot that's made of this. It has a shoe that's made of a bunch of material collected over time or something. So
people used to sacrifice.
Let me just finish this thought here.
Yeah, okay.
Let me just finish this thought. Okay, so he has these connections to space, opening space. But to me, Fenrir he already opens his mouth extremely wide at a couple points in the tale. Vidarr isn't the one who opens his mouth especially wide. Fenrir's characteristic is that he opens his mouth wide, and then Vidarr comes and steps on his jaw and twists the top of his jaw off and stabs him or whatever in his heart. So it's not like he's actually making extra space with Fenrir's mouth. It's that Fenrir's mouth itself is a symbol of extra space, of making space, the wideness of his mouth. So that's why that's actually, it's interesting. But I do think the foot connection and Loki saying make space for Vidarr, they're so slight and subtle that they could be just general coincidences, or they could be signs that the Norse tradition split Vishnu into positive and negative, and Vidarr is the positive Vishnu aspect, and he's pacifying his own negative, destructive half. That's the other possibility here. Is
that's just so confusing for people.
It's so confusing that to me the parallel to Sharaba is so exact, and Sharaba is seen as to me the big question is, or the big thing is, why would Vishnu, that is Vidarr, if Vidarr was Vishnu, why is Vishnu born as a son of Odin? That makes no sense to me. Shiva or Vishnu is never, none of the Vishnu forms are ever born from Shiva. You know what I mean? Why would that would be unparalleled, I think, in any branch. Vishnu or a Vishnu avatar being born directly as a son of Shiva, of Rudra Shiva. That makes no sense to me. To me that's a contradiction, because there's no parallels for it. So
then
that
again,
makes me feel like it's unlikely.
there's no like parentage between Rudra and Indra in the Vedas. That's another thing. But like I'm just playing devil's advocate there. But I've got two more things for you. There's also when we think of Fenris as more of a Chulainn figure who is a youth trying to prove himself, it kind of begs the question, how close were Vidarr and Fenrir? Because it could be like he was killing his own brother instead of just doing his duty. But another thing, and this is the very, very, very crappy attempt at trying to implement the three leaps in Fenris's myth, is that there's a theory that Fenris has two sons, right, who are also wolves that swallow the sun and the moon. There's a theory that
I don't know. Is that true? I think there's like multiple. I mean, correct me if that is what happens. I thought there's just other wolves who swallow the sun and moon, but
it may be a
scholars don't know how they're connected to Fenrir. I don't know if it says Fenrir has those as his children, but maybe it does somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it may be a difference between like prose edda and poetic edda thing. But in the prose edda, yeah, they are his sons, and there's a theory that they're all actually the same thing. So if you think about it, one wolf swallows the moon, that's one step. Another wolf swallows the sun, that's the other step. And one wolf swallows Odin, that's the last step. So
actually, that's quite interesting. Actually,
exactly. I thought it was
it's at least an echo. It's at least an echo or a mirror of, I mean, moon and sun. They're not exactly. Well, yeah, it is interesting though. It is a triple idea.
Well, it's all in space, technically.
It's all in space. Yeah.
Oh, did you hear that?
Yeah.
That's thunder. That was lightning.
It's thunder. That's
nice.
Oh well, I guess the
good.
gods either want to tell you got it wrong, or
they're probably going,
no, that's the
or a little too close.
Never should have brought up Loki. I don't know what you were thinking. You gotta be real sure. You gotta be real.
Wait, how many times did they say Hanuman?
Far too many.
Yeah, I think to me where this leaves me is these questions that we got into. It automatically opens these questions of how can you draw these lines, like, because there's all this sectarian changing back and forth with Namuchi and with is Narasimha the one rampaging and going to destroy the world, and is Sharaba, is Vidarr Sharaba, or is Vidarr a form of Vishnu, and who's on what side, and where do you draw the line? And then also this gets back to like the cross-pollination between the Indra and Vishnu types that we need to.
Yeah, and the Mita and the
there's these impossible.
Basically, everyone like.
Which is
I think that we could also like.
Ares.
Like probably if it was for me, we could go on a very long discussion on how to fit the whole Narasimha thing and Vishnu's Avatara thing in a wider perspective. But also, I think this would probably take too much. So we'll save it for the next call, and
certainly for another effort. But I think since, especially with like the notes I wrote, like I had originally the first little itty bitty note that I wrote had to do with Loki. And then, everything's like coming full circle in many different aspects and all these different conversations and on the call.
That's usually how it
happens. We should eventually start trying to like tie all these things together. Kind of like how I think it was Einherry in the writer's chat.
I know him. Me and him are friends.
Yeah, I mentioned the Indra and Tvashtar myth with the Thor, Tyr, and Hymir myth, and he's like, well, what does it mean? And I essentially was just like, well, I don't know exactly what the specific one means, but it's all about this larger encompassing thing. This whole goal for, reconstruction and comparativism would be to kind of like tie it all together and look at like what their entire original worldview would be. I think that's like the direction we have to take.
Yeah.
I was saying yesterday, actually, like our form of comparative mythology isn't even academia at this point. It's like a form of esotericism.
I mean, it's like using academic instruments to get to the esoteric truth, basically. It's like
Yeah. So this
something
is more.
I just remembered though about relating to Cuchulainn and Vishnu. I forgot to bring up if we had a little bit of time. Was that, and I first heard about this from Fortress of Lug, was Bellerophon's battle fury being pacified by the sight of naked women in the exact same way, but I don't really see what else about him would be Vishnu or Cuchulainn. I was kind of wondering
I mean,
if any of
Bellerophon
you
is an
already.
interesting guy. Like he tries to fly on
Yeah, because
Olympus and he is knocked down. So probably he needs a thorough analysis. I don't think it has been.
Yeah, because he
done
has like
so
an
far.
Ashvin parallel, because when he tries to reach Olympus with on riding his brother Pegasus, he is cut down and killed while Pegasus is entered. So that's like the one son,
Yeah,
the
it's kind of
twin
that
being.
situation.
So it's very strange there, but it's a very uncanny detail unless we can find other instances of that
we
exact
probably
battle
need
fury
more.
being pacified by the sight of naked women. It's
Oh,
a
I'm
very,
sure we
very
can find it.
specific detail.
And
Yeah, if we can
I
find
think
anything about a column, a hand cut off,
I'm going to
anything
trust you
along
to
those
find all the
lines.
naked ladies. I think you can do it.
I
But
mean, the naked
I
ladies
think this
are
directly.
like,
I think this directly relates, especially with Teshas. I think it directly relates to like the general semen retention. Like it's weird to call it that, but brahmacharya. Because
No, really, absolutely.
young men were always taught in Vedic society, at least, to be brahmacharya, which
Well, and
means
Germanic Tacitus says that you were scolded for marrying or consummating the same thing in the ancient world too young because it would impede upon your vigor.
my theory is that
yeah. Also,
this type.
Romans had plenty of sexual regulations. So, for instance, you would abstain from sex at least for 1 day before the ritual. You would probably want to abstain longer if it was like a public ritual. So it's kind of
Yeah, they would
messy here.
also
Like,
be I don't know if it was Romans, but there were people that would separate themselves from their wives before they would embark on to go to war.
Well, yeah, and
oh
even
yeah,
today,
there's also
Narasimha.
probably among the Jews, I think, like in the biblical times, we do have this instance of, and especially Uriah the Hittite. So he's ultimately an Indo-European man happening to fight.
Even modern boxers will
that's what I
like
was
literally
just gonna
go
say.
like a year before their fight. Well,
I was
who's
just
even
gonna
busting
say it.
that?
Yeah. Well, not even just boxers, martial artists in general. That's a real thing. But my theory is on this berserker rage, whether you want to call it a warp spasm or not, which is cool. I'd rather call it a warp spasm. Is that it's actually a form of samavesha or samadhi. So it's like extreme focus and extreme union with a deity. So we could be seeing that this aversion to naked women in these two heroic myths, or one heroic myth, I guess, is actually a breaking of the focus into what
I
you want.
gotta run. I gotta head out.
All right, so I'll stop.
I just wanted to say,
yeah.
I just wanted to say Narasimha is the god of yoga, and that I'll end with that. And thanks guys for discussing. That was really fun.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, also
Thank you.
before you go,
Definitely was.